All right, welcome back friends to my channel. My name is Ty Ridings, and today I want to walk through 3 buckets of essential lessons that I've learned over the last 8 years when it comes to 3D printing to hopefully help you with whatever you're kind of going through on your own 3D printing journey. Without further ado, let's jump right into it. Starting things off with the first bucket that I feel like is a really important one, that is being thoughtful with your 3D printing and your 3D printing processes. So there's really 2 main things to this. The first one is do yourself a favor and have some sort of mental process flow that you have unique to you and your print setup when it comes to starting 3D prints. So what do I mean by that? I can't tell you the number of times that I've been burned by 3D prints because I've done silly things like leave a part on the build plate inside the 3D printer and then start a new print and pop the hot end off, have a spaghetti pit of filament sitting inside the print bed, or a slew of other issues that just can cause damage to hardware that your printer just won't be able to pick up. So yeah, I advise having some kind of checklist, and for me that tends to be getting the part in, slicing the file, picking the color, and then physically walking over to your 3D printer, making sure that color is actually loaded, and also make sure that the build plate is ready to go. So there's nothing on it, it's clean. Give just like a nice quick visual inspection to your 3D printer to make sure, did it shift? Is there just something weird that you haven't paid attention to? Just get your eyes on it really quickly before you start a 3D print. The most critical piece too is watching that first layer go down if you have a printer that typically is not very good at getting bed adhesion. As a general rule, it's good to watch your first layers go down with a machine, kind of build your confidence that way. Don't just repeatedly keep sending it to the printer and realizing you have bed adhesion issues and then just ignoring them every time the print starts. The second part of this too that I constantly struggle with even today is do not rush 3D prints. Time and time again, it'll be 8, 9 o'clock at night. Maybe I'm just remembering that I had something I wanted to make. I make little badge holders for people at work, or someone makes a request that I want to fulfill and I forgot about it till the last minute. Sometimes it's okay to just step back and be like, I'm not going to be able to get that tonight, because I can't tell you also how many times I've rushed into a print job, I've skipped my mental checklist, or I've skipped pieces of it, or maybe I thought I went through it, but I went through it quickly, and I feel like there's just this law in the universe or gremlins that show up and tend to have issues frequently, and they usually stem from me just rushing into a print job. Big piece of advice that I wish I'd given myself, especially in the beginning, that I sort of developed over time. Start small and then work your way up and expand on the capabilities that you're trying to get to with your 3D printing. So what do I mean by that? You're gonna do some research and you're gonna find people recommending, to the moon, all kinds of upgrades that you can either fabricate yourself or buy that they swear your printer needs. But I'm telling you right now, I have been through the gamut, especially when I bought my first Creality. It was a cheaper printer, and I was sucked into wanting to do all kinds of hot end upgrades and buying all the fancy stuff at Micro Center to, change the hardware, whether it was like knobs or this and that. It was fun learning to a degree, but also I feel like some of the upgrades that people swear by or think you really need, like a hot end upgrade that maybe someone needs because they have a very special material they're printing, and for you, you're just printing normal stuff. So a lot of times tweaking these parameters like I talked about with all the many levers of 3D printing ends up working negatively in your favor, and you've now taken, like a machine out of a stock condition that it wasn't really tested for. It can make for a serious headache when you're trying to just get your printer back to normal. And if you ever intend to sell this 3D printer or pass it on to somebody, or if you want to just use it for a really long time, it's going to get harder to do the more you go too crazy with upgrades. So to kind of solidify this, I'll give you some examples of things that do matter and have not mattered for me. Some of the things that have mattered are things like cameras that I've had in my bed chamber so I can monitor prints. LEDs, I think, especially if you're wanting to look at like your first layer adhesion, not having enough lighting just kind of drives you mad. I remember that with my Prusa. I had it in kind of a dark corner of my office and it didn't have any LEDs on it, and I'm constantly, peering under the hot end, watching it try and lay down its first layer, and I just remember it driving me crazy, and then finally putting an LED light on it, and it was just this life-changing experience that was super cheap, fun project. Sometimes you can buy them straight off the shelf, sometimes you can 3D print your own hardware, hardware. Nozzles are really important. Some people overcommit to their nozzles for too long. Whereas for me, I learned very quickly with my Creality, buy a ton of them and have them on stock so that, you know, if you get clogs or repeated, you know, negative behavior with a nozzle, just swap it out or upgrade it to some kind of hardened steel nozzle if you're using crazy abrasive materials or something like that. Leveling probes, massive. This is becoming less and less of an issue today. I think bed leveling has come a long way compared to what it was like when I first started. Bed leveling and print adhesion was like the #1 thing. I think it's getting a lot better. Nail down your first layer calibration and you will be pretty much 90% of the way there to being successful with 3D printing. And then just other silly things that have been really helpful. Tool bins were huge on my Creality, which is ironic because I needed the tools all the time for the weird tweaking that I was doing. A dampening pad. So I bought these dampening tiles from Lowe's. I think they were less than 10 bucks a pop. I bought one for each of my Bamboo Lab printers, threw those under there, and they have helped significantly, not only with like vibrations, but noise and print quality. I've never had an issue. And then the last one, this, you know, I don't know how common this is and I don't really deal with this as much anymore, but back when I had my Creality, I found this firmware update that I put on it by Gyres. It was revolutionary for me because I had just put a probe on my hot end to help with leveling, and then I added this firmware upgrade to it as well. Not only aesthetically are you able to then change like the color settings on your display and really customize your printer, but the actual tuning of your printer went up significantly because you could pick the bed leveling parameters that you wanted to use. So much stuff, and it came from this free software that I just happened to stumble upon. So take a very serious look at your firmware or even your slicing software for that matter, and just see if maybe there's better alternatives out there, because those things can also make a huge transition in the way that you are processing 3D prints. Just to kind of breeze through this as well, these are things that were not useful that I kind of say take with a grain of salt. If you're just going for upgrading everything you possibly can on a Honda Civic, that's fine, do it. There's nothing wrong with that. You do get some level of learning by upgrading stuff, so I'm not going to totally discount it, but things that did not work for me, there were these special Bowden tubes that I kept buying from my Creality. I kept swapping away from the PTFE tubes that came with the 3D printer, and the inside diameter kept being inconsistent on the PTFE tubes that I was buying from this company. It caused binding for the filament, so be mindful of that. I think companies try to do as best as they can with their stock PTFE tubes, and they do wear down. If you get a lot of travel with your hot end and you know it's bumping into stuff or just causing stress to it, my Creality had an absurd amount of like metal upgrade parts. So like the E-stepper assembly, there was the leveling knobs that went under the bed, there were certain springs that were just silly that I found from third-party sites. Really just kind of concisely there, take a grain of salt with everything that you see for sale for not only your 3D printer, but if you're hopping along model repositories and see someone saying, hey, this is the next great thing, think carefully about it before you get too crazy with upgrading your printer with it. Last piece on this topic of starting small and then working your way up, paying for digital content, specifically models. I have a 3-part answer to this, and that's kind of progressively working your way through finding, you know, models and making stuff, right? That's the whole goal. My challenge to you, and I've brought this up in previous videos, if you feel comfortable modeling something, take advantage of it whenever you have small ideas. So for me, there's been random stuff I've made around my house. There's like little feet that I've put on my IKEA shelves. There's little bins that I've made for the bathrooms and random stuff in our house. I encourage you to just starting off small with, you know, give yourself some grace. Sometimes that's the perfect place to start because it is easy and it does give you the chance to really flush out the basics of modeling. If that doesn't work out, the next thing I would encourage is always go to free model repositories because they tend to always pleasantly surprise me in so many ways. A good example of this, I've been trying to find more and more rocket models lately to 3D print. I recently stumbled on a creator that I'll plug in the description below that makes these rocket models for free and posts them on printables and then has nice PDFs with instruction on how to build them. This is a fun project for my son and I where we went through the build, picked the colors, put it together piece by piece over a couple of days. To this day, I still love the way the model looks. It sits on some furniture here in our foyer and it's just a nice piece that I found completely for free. Highly encourage that. I've got another video where I talk about 3D printing resources and I mention some of of my favorite model repositories, so you can jump there to see. If you've gone those two routes, the third piece that is kind of a hot topic now too, paying for your 3D models. What do I feel about that? There's a ton of value you can get out of buying models from designers. For one, they've gotten super cheap. I'm pretty sure it's hard for anybody to avoid seeing dragons being sold out there. And I know like Cinderwing posts her stuff for super cheap. There's McGuybeer. I think I've not only bought models from him, but subscribed to him previously. And I've gotten a ton of value out of those models, and there's something you can use over and over again, and you're supporting somebody that's making really cool stuff. Yeah, the second piece of that is subscriptions. Those are a really big deal right now too, because I think a lot of people are getting into 3D printing to make the dragons, make the whatever is kind of the hot trend right now, and sell them, which I have my own opinions about. If that's your goal, feel free to go after it. But in lieu of that, that has also driven the price of models down, but it's enabled something like subscriptions for designers, where you can pay a monthly fee and then you can print and sell, or whatever agreement you have with the designer in their terms, to sell their content kind of freely, giving them credit for what they've done. Again, I've done this before with McGuybeer and it was awesome. I really enjoyed being able to sell some of the stuff that he had. But again, over time, felt like it's a very saturated place to try and work in, and everybody is doing it right now just because the barrier to entry is so low. Consider that subscriptions versus just flat out purchasing single models. You know, I will say don't turn a blind eye to it right now, because there's some cool stuff out there and it's worth supporting designers who have put a lot of work into learning how to make some really cool stuff that you can use. So really impactful from just the creative standpoint is always be curious with what you're doing with your 3D printer. So I feel like this is a really important thing to talk about, because the more I sort of have conversations with other people that 3D print, one of the first things that usually comes up is like, what filament do you use? And it's like, well, I use this, this, and this. And a lot of times I feel like people kind of stick to one brand and that's it, which is totally fine, especially when you want to have some level of consistency, because there are so many levers that you can pull when it comes to doing prints. But on the flip side, for me, I feel like I stuck in this world of only doing PLA forever, and only, you know, I found a really good brand. I talk about Hatchbox a lot, but I feel like I stuck with them for way too long, and so many new colors and variants of material came on the market, and I kept kind of pushing away from it because I felt like I was just really had nailed down my consistency with prints, and it was all, you know, leading back to just the material I was using, and I kind of didn't want to branch out. But once I started to, it was a huge transformation for me, because there were parts that I was making that looked kind of okay or sort of cool with the PLA I was used to using, and then I started, you know, experimenting with different material varieties, and it just changed the designs that I was coming up with dramatically. And you know, that's not just for the aesthetic piece. When I started getting more and more heavily into making applied engineering products, I started looking at things that had special, you know, strength properties or ESD properties, and it unlocked this whole new world of capabilities that I just didn't think 3D printing was quite ready for yet. So it was sort of squashing my own bias for a lot of the parts that I was making as well. Get outside of your comfort zone a little bit. It's okay to find the things that work, and in the beginning you're kind of fight or flight a little bit depending on the machine you get. So I understand narrowing down on a specific brand of filament or one machine that you like, that you're like, I'm gonna be diehard with this machine forever and I'm never gonna branch out, which I've been guilty of before, trust me. It's healthy to have that curiosity and branch out where you can and challenge yourself. Constantly be looking at ways that you could be doing something a lot better, or just if you see something that just looks fun, give it a shot. The worst case, you learn something in the process of trying to branch out and you're better for it. You can advise better and know better for the future when you're trying to do different things. It'll be unexpected. You never really know what things are going to come up, that you'll be gracious to yourself for having pushed the limit a little further previously, so that you can apply that to the next thing that you're wanting to 3D print. And just a little piece that I kind of want to plug into this too. You know, I talked a lot about materials, but don't get too comfortable with your machine as well. So things like maintenance, bed sheets, other little things that kind of go into the hardware side of it. A lot might seem like foo-foo. You know, find the right balance there. Don't just completely neglect your machine at all times, thinking that this thing's gonna last forever, or seeing signs of wear or something and just deciding to ignore it. It's kind of like a car, in the sense that you really do have to be the master of your own destiny there, and know when it's time to take care of things, and be willing to troubleshoot where it's appropriate. Do some research and make sure you're taking really good care of whatever machine it is, and it will absolutely pay you dividends as well. All right, just kind of closing out the video here, I did want to say this. There really has never been a better time to get into 3D printing, and I highly recommend it to anybody that I really can kind of convince to sit down to listen to me about 3D printing. The access to 3D printing is so great right now, and I think a lot of people are trying to adopt it and enable others to get into it. So there's also a ton of free content out there. I'm making this video on YouTube, and I'm one of hundreds, if not thousands of others that are also posting content about 3D printing. So you really can find information related to whatever you're trying to get into or what use case you have 3D printing for, and educate yourself freely on it. Thanks for sticking around for this entire video, and I hope that you got some value out of the lessons that I've picked up along the way. And as always, please comment below if there's some lessons that you feel like are applicable to this conversation that other people can see that's helped you a ton. Like the video and subscribe to my channel if you feel like you're getting some value out of this and want to see more of the things that I'm trying to put together. I appreciate all the support. You guys are great. Thanks everyone.